Welcome to the Acts 29 podcast. Acts 29 is an organization and global network of churches that exist to plant churches worldwide. Now here's your host, Vice President of Acts 29 Church Planting, Dr. Adam Flint.
Well, guys, welcome to the Acts 29 podcast.
Glad to be here, man.
Good to have you. Over here on my left is Tim Bice, pastor at Greenbrier Church in Albany, Georgia. Albany, not Albany.
Well, you know, if you're more sophisticated Albanian, you could say Albany.
Right, yeah.
But say Albany.
Yeah. And over here is John Schroeder.
Yeah.
At the Well Church.
In Americus.
That's right.
Georgia.
Yeah.
So
been in the news a little bit lately.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Our favorite president, right, in our area, President Carter, passed away. So 100 years, man. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
So
what a life. Yeah. Well, hey guys, thanks for being on. And Acts 29, as a network, we say we plant churches worldwide. And what we mean is there's a part of the organization of Acts 29 that helps kind of put trellis for the vine to grow on. And then what we also mean is on the network side of things that it isn't just a church that plants or a planter that goes out to plant. I mean, that happens every once in a while. But what we really mean is, hey, as a network, we want to band churches together to come up behind and support church planters. And so you guys have a story of doing that, and a long history together. And so I want to hear that story, and maybe talk a little bit about how that worked, what didn't work, what's going great, things we can learn as a network, and how we can help some church planters tap into that network.
sure.
So Tim, tell us a little bit of the story of Greenbrier and how it came to be. And
Well, first of all, we broke every church planting rule in the book. I
Yes.
can tell you that. I put my resignation in to the church that I was preaching, and the next Sunday we started Sunday services in our house. That was 2008. Learned a lot since then. But John was also with us. We had three guys, young guys. John was one of them.
Yep.
Mike was 22, TJ was 23, you were 23. I was 36.
Yes.
And Jay, my wife, of course, was right in there with us. And man, God has been so gracious to us. We started in our house, outgrew that, moved to a school. We were there for like 3.5 years or something. And someone helped us get our own building. We've been there ever since. And but John's been there every step of the way. To begin with, he was just there to help.
Yeah.
I'll just do whatever.
Yep.
This guy put a microphone and a video camera into our local college and just interviewed people like William the Master stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
little man on the street.
Yeah. Way to go, man.
Yep.
Give me some time. I'll try it. So,
So,
did Tim let you play drums at all?
yeah.
oh yeah, he was our drummer.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
we had served in a previous church too, together. And we've been praying, should we start a church? And the Lord just dispersed all of us. Everybody went in different directions. And then like a few months later, we're back together again saying, we're going to do this or not. And we felt like the Holy Spirit led us to do it. And so John he drummed, did college ministry. And then eventually we brought him on, just like, he's like, I'm going to quit my job. This is what I want to do.
So, okay, before we jump into that, talk a little bit about Albany as a town. Like, what is it? What is it like?
Yeah.
Kind of what's the culture of things?
So Albany, Georgia is the hub of Southwest Georgia. Now,
That's a claim.
That's right. A lot of agriculture.
We are the hub of
We are the hub.
South Georgia.
If that's it, well, yeah. But
I
like,
get
there's
it.
a lot of agricultural
Yeah.
communities around us. And
Good hunting.
very good hunting. We love to hunt. Man, this, the population of Albany is like 77,000 in our city. But I guess it was like 25 years ago, and a lot of communities suffered through this in the South, but the Great White Flight, a lot of white people moved out of our county into the next county over. And so, it feels like it was such a stark difference between the two. There was a time where if you read some of the articles that were out there about best cities to live in and worst cities, Albany was top 10 worst cities to live in the United States. Leesburg, the city next to us, was made the top 50 cities to live in the United States. So that's one of the things that...
Because of that dynamic
Yes.
of population shift.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But we kind of just look at the community as a whole the best that we can. So there's like probably 150,000 people in our vicinity that we feel like, we could reach. So that's kind of how our city is set up. Get a bunch of good folks though, man. Like it's all but the Nats.
Yes.
Have you ever been, you know about the Nats, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Other than that-
here's a crazy story though too is so the railroad is very important back in the day, right? So actually, both the Marine base and P&G came to Americus first and said, "Hey, we want to build here," and Americus said, "No, we want to be a small town," and so they went to Albany. So the crazy thing is that Americus would have been Albany, and Albany possibly could have been.
And we could just sit on that for a minute and
Yeah,
lessons
I know,
as
right?
a planter could learn, like when opportunity comes knocking,
Yeah.
and
For
you
sure.
go, nah,
Yeah.
that's not really our
Yeah.
vision, our plan. That's not in our
Yeah,
prospectus.
that's right.
You know?
That's right. We don't want to grow.
Yeah.
But early on in our DNA, we knew we wanted to multiply. We wanted to make disciples and make disciples, and we wanted to plant churches and plant churches.
Why? Because
Great
let's not
commission
skip over it.
Great commission for
Yeah.
me personally. And I think all of us adopted that. We're like, yeah, we need to multiply. And we see it throughout the scriptures, even from the beginning, in Genesis. And so it was just in us. We planted that church and we wanted to plant more churches to plant churches. We felt like that was the best way for us to make disciples.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah.
And so in 2017, we planted our first church out of Greenbrier. And it didn't make it. It was like a year. But we learned so many things. And about that time, I became an assessor for Acts 29. And through the training, I'm like, oh my goodness, we messed it up again, and this time, we're like, goodness, like, what can we learn, from all of these mistakes? And then I don't know exactly what year it was, but John was like, man, I think I really want to consider planting a church. I think it was kind of in the 2020, 2021, we really got serious about what that might look like.
Do you think you talked about starting one and it didn't work? I mean, I know there's all kinds of factors in it, right? But do you think it was you guys just weren't ready as a sending church, or was it just too quick, too early, or was it the wrong?
There were several things. One thing, we planted a service and not the gospel in the city. And that was part of it. I don't think we trained the team well enough.
Yeah.
The lead guy wasn't trained well enough. We didn't raise any money for him, so he was still working a job. Things like that.
Yeah.
And I think we rushed to it as well. And I took the blame for that as a lead guy because I wanted to see it so bad. And so I was.
Well, and the guy had a heart for it too. It wasn't
did.
like, okay,
Absolutely.
we feel like this is an area. This guy has a heart for it. How do we just get him and send him out and try to do the best that we can? And I think again from that we've learned that there's so many things, and we're talking about relationships, networks that we really just didn't involve a lot of others into. And so I think we definitely learned from that for sure.
Well, and I mean, the way you describe Greenbrier starting. You go, oh, okay, well,
that's
that can work. I can do it again. And you can go, well, maybe that was the exception to the way things, those things do happen, but they're not always the way they should happen.
I feel like we went the right route this time, though, John. Planted him. So John was our executive pastor, and he had been for over 5 years, I believe. And so that from the beginning to where he was as executive pastor, pretty much just running the church. And he learned every facet.
Yeah.
And so it was almost like a 13-year residency. In a sense.
And what I really enjoyed, I think, looking back on a lot of these things is just the spiritual father that Tim was to me, that he wanted to bring me into these environments. He wanted me to bring me into the network. He wanted me to meet his friends and to realize that there's something bigger than even what I know, right? Because Acts 29 for most, maybe just a normal church member or partner is, oh, that's just something that we do, the pastor does over here. It just felt so much more real to me. And just watching that, and then watching his life going, man, this is something I want to be involved in. And knowing that I have friends too, that I'm not going to have to go find friends in the network. I already have friends. And that was probably 3 or 4 years where I was meeting with some of these guys that are funding me now. And so
I think that's
immediately
so
they thought,
important.
well, of course we're going to fund this guy.
Right.
We know this guy.
Right. And that's one of the things as we build out this church planting pipeline, one of the things I've really pushed for is to go, hey, let's bring guys, potential planters in earlier. Like, let's make them feel, not just feel, but let's get them in Acts 29 as early as they possibly can.
Yes.
To your point, like, it just goes better for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Like, training goes better, funding goes better, assessment goes better, discernment goes, all of those things go way better the earlier. Because I think there was a season where it was like, okay, once you get assessed and finish your conditions, then you're in.
Mm-hmm.
And that really was a membership mentality as opposed to like this mission mentality.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really a big deal.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things that I recognize too is, just being brought in, obviously as a lead guy, there are certain things that Tim just had to take that we didn't really experience. So you have to kind of get out there and go, oh, like this is what he meant when he said, you don't really understand those certain things, right?
Yeah.
But I was brought into so many things, and that with that ministry mindset of even as an executive pastor, all the small things. So when you're planting a church, you're like, hey, we can't plant without bylaws, without this, without this. So it's not just, hey, I'm going to show up and start preaching. It's like, no, you're planting a church. You're not just a preacher. You're a planter. What does that mean? And so I felt like I gained a lot of that in prep work for when God called me. I felt like, and it had to be obviously spirit led, because one of the questions on the Acts 29 assessment is, do you feel called to plant a church? And my first response was, well, I've already done that. So it's not like I needed to prove anything. It's like, well, but is God calling me to plant again as the lead guy? What does that look like? Yeah. And so I had to really pray, which is why we did a sabbatical, and the Lord really intimately spoke to me. And then we just kind of went from there.
So, I mean, there are people who are called to be executive pastors.
Yeah.
Right. And their gifting and their personalities and all of that. Did you feel like you were built and cut kind of in that mold, or was there always a like, I'm not really sure this is me?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what did you see in that?
John's the kind of guy that whatever is put before him, he's going to figure it out. He's going to do it well. But I don't think that it's necessarily his greatest gifting. He's an evangelist.
Yeah.
And he cares for people. I think those are his greatest gifts. But man, he can also organize and get things done. And so it was just, I guess a huge gift from the Lord to be able to do that. I don't have that.
Right.
I messed it all up and I was in charge, Yeah. And so John came in and cleaned a lot of stuff up and made it a lot better.
Yeah. My dad is military. So, that phrase, adapt and overcome, it's always like, that's what you do, and we saw a need in the church. We wanted Tim to become more specialized, right? Because when you're planting, we're doing everything. Mm-hmm. Hey, we want to specialize you. We want to get you into that space. And so it just seemed right. And what we cared more just about numbers and things was culture. Are we creating the culture? Gospel fluency, gospel centeredness, making disciples. Let's put people in those positions who care more about that than just the numbers. And then I learned over time, God was super gracious, gave us a lot of favor. But that, again, that trained and equipped me to say, man, if God is going to call me to go out, I know how important numbers are. And I can't just say, oh, you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So that was very helpful for me, I think.
I want to add this too. There was a time where John became aware of something. He's like, Tim, you're always fighting for us, but who's fighting for you? Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, the Lord,
Yeah,
whatever. I don't guess anyone.
Yeah.
But it was in context of a conversation we were having actually about Acts 29. It was back in the day when, the pastors and pastors' wives retreat was a big deal. And only the lead pastors and the wives could go. You remember that time?
Yeah.
And so he's like, we want to make sure this happens for you. And for whatever reason, I'm like, man, I need to bring Johnny to that's what we call Johnny sometimes, to everything that I can with Acts 29. Just go with me. And that's where, like we said a moment ago, a lot of relationships were built. So it was almost a reciprocal type thing. I'm trying to support you, love you, care for you. He's like, I want to do that for you, which made me say then, dude, I need to get you around some other guys. If you're going to support this, I want you to be around it. And so it was kind of like cyclical building up of one another, wanting each other to win.
Yeah. And I think that's so important. Like, if people are listening to this and they're not the lead person, like they're a staff member, an executive, like be a champion of your lead pastor and other people. Like you can't advocate for yourself. I mean, to a certain degree you can, but it gets real weird.
It does.
And lead pastors need somebody going to bat for them.
Right.
They really do. They need somebody to be the embodiment of the Lord fighting for them.
But we had no idea what this was leading to.
Yeah.
Right. We would have our area gatherings and he would go with me.
Yeah.
And he met, and so, I don't know. Do you want to tell a story though? First of all, like how the Lord spoke to you. You said it a minute ago.
I want to, go to the sabbatical, tell the sabbatical story and all that.
Then we had to get him sent out when he came back from sabbatical and said, "Yeah, God's called me to plant a church." We're like, "All right, let's get busy."
Yeah. I want to, I guess, couch this. Let me just say that, just understanding that this was a very clear picture for me, and it was a very intimate picture for me. I'm very thankful for it. And I don't know if I'll ever experience something like that again. But when I went into sabbatical, my heart was, Lord, I really don't need to plant another church. I don't feel like that. I have to do this for me.
Right.
If this is what you want to do, then I'm all for it. And I had people, coming to me say, "Oh, I think you could plant a church." I'm like, you don't understand how hard this is. Especially
cool that you see it. Yeah, it's easy for you to say.
Especially if Jesus doesn't go, I'm not going, man. Right. It's just not worth it. I mean, Greenbrier is great. It's a healthy church. I love this church. I can see myself living, being here. So I don't need this, but I want to know what Jesus wants. And so we did this, and probably a few weeks into the sabbatical, very helpful, prayer and fasting, went off on a little solo retreat. And I just remember looking over the history of Greenbrier, praying, seeking the Lord, and in a very personable way, I was actually just sitting down, practicing His presence, which was a new thing for me. Like, what does it look like to practice His presence? And just felt a very, again, I'm going to go a little crazy here, but just felt an impression of the Lord as I'm sitting on a couch, the impression of the Lord. And He said, "What do you want to ask?"
Yeah.
And it was just so beautiful. It was so wonderful. I so needed this moment because I knew whatever was going to happen, I'm going to remember this moment for the rest of my life. And so I actually asked Him about a lot of things, personal stuff, friends, family. It wasn't just about church planting, but I did ask Him, "Lord, do you want me to plant this church?" And I felt a very clear call. Not only do I want you to go, if you don't go, you're going to be disobedient and it's going to affect Greenbrier. And I want to give abundance to both of you. And so from that, I just said, all right, what does this look like? And so then I got home, right? Told my wife I was so amped up, ready to go. Probably the glory of the Lord was shining on my face, right? Yeah. And I get to my wife and I said, I heard from the Lord. This is what He wants us to do. And she just kind of smiled. She goes, "Yeah, He kind of told me 2 weeks ago, but I just wanted to make sure you knew." And I was like, well, that's great. So it was a very special moment for sure.
But I mean, I think that's really important. Like I've kind of given my life to thinking about when people say the Lord told me, like this whole issue of discernment. And I believe the Spirit works, lead, move. Like we want to be Spirit led. I think the best we can be in that. But I think one of the things, I mean, you just said like, there's an impression as best I can feel, as best, like, but also, man, to Jill's credit, like she didn't push you into that. She just patiently waited on the Lord to confirm, okay, I got a sense of this and discerned this.
Absolutely.
Now you did. And then
also,
from there,
when we got back,
there you go.
We started meeting with other partners of our church. And they were like, hey, by the way, I was just putting this in my journal. Does Americus mean anything to you? We feel called, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, this is crazy, because that was in our minds, right? Then we had right before we got all in, and we had over 10 confirmations, which is really encouraging. But one of the very first ones, another pastor and his wife came to our house for dinner and said, hey, we've already called Tim, just as a heads up.
One of our pastors.
Yeah, one of our pastors, elders at our church, and said, man, we're really excited. We don't know what you're going to say, but we want to tell you 3 things. Number 1, we do feel that you're called to plant a church. We feel like it's going to be in Americus, and we're supposed to go with you. Now, one of the things that was confirmation for us was we don't want to leave as a solo pastor. We want to have a plurality of elders. So this was one of our benchmarks. And Jill had even mentioned right before the sabbatical was like, we would love to have, Matthew and Ashley go with us. And so just seeing those things, that's when it's not just like you said, void of, hey, I have this calling, I feel this thing. It's people are starting to confirm these things over time. And you're just like, what else do you do but just enjoy the ride?
Right. And I think another thing that you said is so important is this wasn't about your glory, and it wasn't about your glory. I mean, you were just like, Lord, I'm fine. Like, if I make much of you here, I'd be happy to stay here and make much of you. If you want to move me, that's great. And I think that's such a huge part of the calling of like your identity and worth isn't all wrapped up in this thing.
Yeah. And it kind of reminded me of like when Judah or Jessa, right? After, during the pregnancy, like the wife is all about it. And you're like, I don't feel anything. Yeah. There's a baby in there. I know it's mine. I'm excited for it. But then all of a sudden you see this child come out, and you're just like, there's a new love that you didn't exist before that you do have now. And so that's kind of what it felt like. Right. Lord, I'm here. But then when you felt that calling and you knew that it was real, it was like, I have a new love for Americus that I didn't have before.
Right.
That's good.
So he comes back from sabbatical, says, okay, these things are happening. People have been talking to you.
Yeah.
What's going on?
So both of us, I think you just said it. We decided we would remain neutral in this time of prayer. We're just going to wait for him, for the Lord to show us. And so it was evident when he came back.
Which, by the way, sabbatical was awesome. Greenbrier paid for it. Like, they loved on me. They said, get away. Don't worry about anything. We're going to take care of you. Do what you want to do. And so we were very thankful for that, by the way.
Yeah. So the first thing we did was like, look, we got to move you over into a residency of some sort. So we created like this, we propped up this residency pretty much, but it wasn't that John needed any more training. We didn't think, but we wanted to make sure that his salary was taken care of, and that he had space to hand the baton to our next guy to become our executive pastor, and also begin legwork of planting this church.
Yeah, it wasn't just, it was important for you guys, but it was important for Greenbrier to have some time to backfill some gaps that he would have left and all that.
And I think John to begin with was like, man, I think it might take 3 years. And we were like, no, it's going to be hard to last that long. You know what you're doing.
Yep.
And so it was like a year probably.
Well, I got back in August and you were like, what about January? So, so we started in January. We started that process. Yeah. But it took a little bit to get actually onto the ground. So in February, I was assessed by Acts 29. Went through that, and then in March we had sold our home. Didn't even have a home in Americus yet. We sold it. We're homeless. God provided a place. Again, these confirmations were really awesome. So we're like, all right, this is our home now. This is where we're going to be.
Which if there's a house, like the house, I've been to your house.
Yeah.
Like, it's a church planting house. It's great.
It's awesome.
How many people? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. It was so funny because Jill was like, "Hey, we should look at this house." But man, maybe I ain't looking at this house. There's no way I'm looking at this house. You know, it was basically we're going from 1,100 square feet to a 4,000 square foot house. Right now, again, context wise, we live in America, so cost of living is a lot lower, but it was still expensive for us. Right. And so, but we're going through this, we're talking to a realtor, and Jill has this moment again where she's just like, "Hey, could you just tell the owner of this house to drop it by like $50,000? And she was like, "Yeah, it doesn't work that way. It literally goes off the market like within the next week, comes back on the market, and a month later, $50,000 less." So that's one of those things where I'm like, all right, well, now I'll pay attention. Now I'll go and start having those conversations. So it's just, you start seeing it over and over and over again like that.
I feel like we should have Jill here.
I'm telling you, man. I have so many people that are just like, can Jill pray for me?
That's
I'm
right.
like, no, you're not getting any of this. That's all mine.
Okay. So
Yeah, go ahead.
talk us through, you guys talk us through, because to this point, you are being involved. You're intentionally involving him in the network and things like that. But this is mainly a Greenbrier sending thing. So what did that look like for Greenbrier in terms of budget, staffing, all of that kind of stuff? Because even in the best of situations, it's hard
Yes.
to send somebody.
Yeah. We are just getting back on our feet.
Yeah.
I didn't expect it. I really didn't. I thought, Lord bless us. We'll be fine. We went through a really tough financial year because we paid John's salary for a while, and then we had to pay our new guy.
Yeah.
But it actually ended up being good because it caused us to say, how can we steward our finances better? So it ended up being good.
Yeah.
But then we also sent out another elder with John and one of our deacons. And we didn't think that it would create such a void, but it did. It has been difficult for us.
Yeah.
Because we went from 7 elders to 5. And you're going through it, you're like, man, I miss John, I miss Matthew. Like those guys, they did so much. And they were so important and valuable to our church. So it was difficult, man. It was really, really hard. But man, like, I think finally it feels like we've got some stability. Probably. Yeah, but you take a hard hit. We're not a big church. I guess we're a medium-sized church. And so you take a hit like that and you struggle.
Yeah.
Or you can't.
Well, and one of the things too is in the previous years, we'd always designed it to say, hey, by the end of the year, we want to give $10,000 to our next church plant. So we had we had like probably $50,000 or $60,000 like just sitting there. So that was great. And then it was, well, what are we going to commit though every year? Do we want to continue to do that? And so, so on the financial end, I mean, it was very encouraging for me as a person that's being sent out is, hey, we're going to do everything that we can. And then it was, again, Tim said, well, let me reach out to some guys. Let's talk it up. Let's let people know what's going on. And so for him to come around site and start fighting for me was so big. Because obviously we knew that the call was there. But you want to make sure that people feel relationally connected to those things. And that helped by being already in the process, kind of with people, but also just him just making calls and just saying, hey, look, I want you to check out this guy's perspectives. Yeah. Like seriously. Yeah. Don't just say it. Do it.
Well, I think we contacted 22 Acts 29 friends that I've built relationships with and said, hey man, this guy's going to knock it out the park. It's a great place to give to. And so I would go to Americus on Thursdays, and we would sit in he got him out of office, and so we'd sit there and we would just work on it, and I would text and call people, and he's like writing notes, following up, crafting emails, and we did that probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 months, where that's all we did on Thursdays, is just make contacts. Because so when we joined the network in 2013, we were asked to give 2% to Acts 29 directly. Yep. And then the remaining 8% to church planting. And we took it seriously. Yeah. And so we've been doing it since we've entered the network. We've been doing it. We've never missed it. But what we decided though was we were going to kind of back away from some of the planting that we'd already supported, and the vast majority of that goes to John. Right. But we're still supporting other 829 guys too. Yeah. Yeah. But we're going to do that. So that was helpful. But man, what's so encouraging is how many other Acts 29 guys.
So talk about that. Talk about that, because I think this is really important. This is one of the things I wanted to hit on today is when we say we plant churches, it's not just a guy plants a church or a church plants a church, but the benefit of a network is there's a bunch of people that can plant a church together in that. So what is that?
Well, I'll give you
like.
Let me talk about, because I'm super passionate about this part. So, in our area, which is called the South Georgia area, there's 7 of us. There was 8. Now there's 7 of us, including John. If we meet every single month, no matter what, because we become so close, and the collaboration between us, the camaraderie between us is just amazing. And so, every man in our area gives to John, still gives to him. I mean, it's been a couple of years. 100%.
Yeah.
Why? Because we built relationships. They saw his character, his gifting, and the call.
And it's relational collaboration.
Absolutely.
Like, it's great to have relationships, but the relationships aren't the end in of themselves.
Correct.
In this network. We're on a mission to plant guys like you and do it together.
And it wasn't just the money. For example, Jason Burrell, Sojourn Church in Perry, Georgia, sends volunteers.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
I mean, things like that.
I mean, the neighboring churches that are close enough, they'll do that. And then I get to go and, be a part of their church. I can go and serve in some way, in some capacity. So it really does feel like family, right? It doesn't just feel like, oh, this is what we're supposed to do. Just give, because that's what, like, hey, we're building family here.
Yeah.
We want to take care of each other.
Yeah. We don't know the exact number of dollars that will come in, but we've estimated it is over $500,000 coming in to the Well Church from other Acts 29 churches.
Yes. That's what, as we coach guys, we tell them, you should try to raise commitments of at least $500,000.
Yeah.
It's just going to take. Yeah, it's just going to take that kind of money.
And I just encourage some of the guys too, because I mean, I've had conversations about fundraising and things with other guys, and I think there's a nervousness to ask, and I'm like, you got just to ask, you got to ask, because I'll say, well, I'm not like getting a lot of support. I'm like, well, who have you asked? Like, I don't think they'll do it. I was like, well, you just got to ask.
Yeah, don't ever say. Yeah, you cannot think that way, kid.
And I think that you advocating for him is cute. Like, hey guys, we're doing this. Will you join in? I've watched his life for 13 years. He's a guy of character, gifting. Yeah. This is on. Let's do this together. This is what we do.
Yeah. And so we started a residency. We've got a guy, Brandon Bryan, who is our student pastor, and he'd been with us for 8 years. By the time the residency's over, he would be with us over 10 years. I'm going to do the same thing.
Yep.
Proven guy, high character, very gifted, talented, and called.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Will you give?
Yeah.
And by that time, John hopefully will be autonomous.
And I'll know a bunch of other guys, and I'll be like, why aren't you giving?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now it's the we even grows like out of us within the network where John will be like, hey, would you give to Brandon?
Yep. And that's the beauty of the way Acts 29 is set up. Because we could just say, hey, give 5% to the network, and then the network will distribute it in a very centralized way. But I love that we've done it this way, of that 2% and 8%, because I think there's so much more buy-in from churches and commitment and being on mission together. And I think there's a bunch of churches that don't have Johns right now. And they're like, well, we want to be in the game, but we don't have a guy.
Yeah.
Or we don't even see a future guy in the next few years.
Yeah.
So, but how do we get in there? And it's like, well, we can jump in with you and other planters and invest in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so even like Brian Lowe, who graciously stepped in and helped their church, Exodus Church in North Carolina, to give, but like it wasn't just money. He's like coaching John and helping John, like, hey man, let's have some conversations. You know what I mean? So there's so many guys that have gifts and experience. They're a few steps ahead even. They could give so much. And it's not that hard. Pick up the phone,
Yeah.
Once a month or whatever, and say, hey man, how can I help you? What do you need?
Yeah.
So it's not just the money. You also have a lot of collaboration.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's a joy for me because when I think about going into a situation, I mean, I've called you several times like, all right, I could probably figure this out, but I'm going to call Adam. Like, Adam, like, have you ever run into this before? And that's like, I need help.
Yeah.
And so I'm calling Tim like, hey, what do we need to do? And so it's just helpful for me to know that I'm not as in a sense, I don't want to say isolated. I can't figure out the right word, but I'm planting this church, but I feel connected, and I know I can call anybody at any point in time, and they're there for me, and that's really encouraging for me.
Absolutely.
I want to just make sure that we said this too. Like, this is hard.
Yeah.
I've heard so many stories over the years of people who do similar things to us as what we've done. Like, hey, we're sending out our best guys. Send out your best. It's hard.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
But
For
it's worth
sure.
it. But it's worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's worth it.
Yeah. And that's why I keep
Stay
going back
faithful.
to me and Jesus, because
Yeah.
there's times where I'm like, man, what am I doing here?
Stay faithful.
like,
Keep going.
And you have to have a really compelling reason why you'll send
Yes.
and why you'll go and why you'll fund.
Yeah.
Like, because it works isn't a good enough reason.
Yeah.
Correct.
Or, the Lord will bless it and backfill it. Like, there's got to be some real deep, compelling reasons.
Right. I want John to share those. How many salvations have you had since you moved to Americas to start this church?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're at 9 salvations,
9 salvations.
and some of these people never been to church in their lives,
Right.
completely just out of that realm. And now, I mean, and we're going for people that didn't go to church at all to now they're showing up even weekly. I'm like, guys, you don't understand the sanctification, the joy in that, watching them go through that process. So,
How many college students have heard the gospel since
Uh,
you've moved to Americas to plant a church?
yeah, over 250. I'm spending a lot of time through FCA and other organizations just spending time with these college students.
So that's our why.
Yeah.
We want to see disciples made in Americas.
Yeah.
And it's worth every dollar. It's worth every stress point. It's worth losing. I don't say losing, but giving.
Yeah.
yeah.
2 of our best.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's worth it.
Yeah. I mean, there is no greater evangelistic strategy
Yeah.
than
No,
planting
it's not.
churches. There isn't.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it's worth it.
And again, I mean, it comes to as you go out and you start to, I mean, there's so much. I wish that most people could plant like me, honestly. I just feel so much when I really think about like, okay, what are the things that I'm concerned about? It's probably not what most church planters are concerned about in one sense. But there are other factors of just experiencing the enemy's attacks, whether it's through the city things that I'm trying to do. It just feels so heavy. And so I'm leaning going, all right, Lord, if this is the best strategy, I'm thankful for it. But at the same time, like I just want to grow in my relationship with you right now. And I keep telling people and my kids, like, if this church plant, whatever happens in the next 10 years, I'm still going to be a dad. Like, I got to fight for those kind of things. So it's very, very difficult because you want to just put all of your effort into that. But you're like, what is the Lord doing in me? Like, this is for me too. And so I'm growing in that as well.
Yeah. I think it's not easy. It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's true. And it should be.
Should be.
Like, it should be.
Yeah.
But it's not complicated. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you took just some very simple steps. Like, I'm going to pull John in close on some of these things. I'm going to include him early. We're going to do some training, and then we're just going to be real open-handed. And then we're going to stay with them. Like, that's not complicated things, And then on both of yours, like, just ask, like you said, like, who have you just asked to be a partner with you?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's easy, but it's not complicated to get the phone call.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you called us. Like, I remember that. And it was, hey, we're doing this thing. Would you partner with us?
Yeah.
Here's what we're doing.
Absolutely.
So,
and I've had a couple of no's that I just kept pressing anyway. It's like, well, what about next year? I'll keep sending you the newsletters.
You've got a couple of them too.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I just kept sending them newsletters like, hey, this is what we're doing. And I just kind of felt like, well, if you're in the first 3 years, people can really still value that as almost like it's your first year.
Absolutely.
Take advantage of that and go, hey, will you just help us with the next 2 years? Just get us over that leg. The next 4 or 5 years, just stick with us for another year. That would be very helpful. And then people will recognize that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, guys, I love hearing your story. I love that history. I love that you didn't stop after the first time and go, well, I guess that, it didn't work, so we'll just give up. I love that you stuck in there. I love the way you all have done this together. And for the rest of us in the network that get to be a part of it, man, it is such a joy. Like, it is so encouraging to our faith and our walk with Christ to get to see what you guys are doing and to be second, third, fourth, 10th chair in that is really a gift. So
Awesome.
Thanks for what you're doing.
yeah,
Thanks, Adam.
absolutely. Thank you, Adam.
All right.
Love it.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Acts 29 podcast. If you want to connect with Acts 29 or find out more about planting a church with Acts 29, you can go to acts29.com. Go ahead and hit like on the podcast and don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. Thanks again for joining us.